Welcome back to A320 Knowledge, your trusted source for Airbus expertise. Today we'll be diving into Column 1 of the FMA, the Autothrust modes. The Flight Mode Annunciator, known as the FMA, sits at the top of the primary flight display, the PFD. It displays the status of the autothrust and autopilot modes and is split into different sections. The FMA remains the main reference for the pilots regarding the status of the autoflight system and is a key part of Airbus's automation philosophy. Column 1 of the FMA will display the autothrust modes that are armed or active, as well as a request for the pilot to do something. Active modes are displayed in green, whilst armed autothrust modes are displayed in white with a box around it. The autothrust operates in two distinct modes, fixed thrust and variable thrust. Fixed thrust is a constant thrust setting whereby the airspeed is controlled by the pitch of the aircraft. Example FMAs of fixed thrust are thrust climb and thrust idle. Fixed thrust is primarily used during climbs and descents when a specific rate of climb or descent is not required. Variable thrust, on the other hand, has a fluctuating thrust whereby the airspeed is controlled by the thrust output of the aircraft. Example FMAs of variable thrust are speed and Mach. Variable thrust is used during level flight, during climbs and descents when a specific rate is not required, and also during altitude captures. Variable thrust is automatically defaulted to when flight guidance, such as the flight directors, are turned off. We will now go into each autothrust FMA one by one. Man toga is displayed with white text surrounded by a white box. This is displayed when autothrust is armed and at least one thrust lever is in the toga detent. Man flex, alongside a flex temperature, in this case 54, is displayed with white text surrounded by a white box. The flex temperature numbers are blue, displayed when autothrust is armed and at least one thrust lever is in the MCT flex detent and the other is at or below this detent. Man MCT is displayed with white text surrounded by a white box. Displayed when at least one thrust lever is in the MCT flex detent and the other is at or below this detent. MCT is the maximum continuous thrust and is the maximum thrust the engine can be set to for an extended period of time. Man thrust is displayed with white text in an amber box when the autothrust is armed and the most forward thrust lever is above the climb detent. Two engines operative or one above flex MCT with one engine out and not in a detent. Thrust MCT is displayed with green text when the autothrust is active in thrust mode and the most forward lever is in the MCT flex detent, engine out. If the other thrust lever is below the flex MCT detent, thrust for that engine would be commanded by thrust lever angle, TLA. It will be accompanied by a lever asymmetry FMA message and an autoflight ECAM message. Thrust climb is displayed with green text when the autothrust is active in fixed thrust mode, and the most forward thrust lever is in the climb detent. If the other thrust lever is below the climb detent, its thrust will be commanded by TLA. It will be accompanied by a lever asymmetry FMA message and an autoflight ECAM message. Thrust idle is displayed with green text when the autothrust is active in thrust mode and commands idle thrust. Airspeed, managed or selected, will be maintained by varying the aircraft pitch. Thrust lever is displayed with green text when the autothrust is active in thrust mode with both thrust levers below the climb detent or below MCT flex when operating with one engine only. Speed, or Mach, is displayed with green text when the autothrust is active in speed or Mach mode. Speed is enunciated when IS is being referenced, and Mach is enunciated when referencing Mach. Thrust will vary as required to attempt to maintain the vertical path commanded. Airspeed is ignored if the vertical path cannot be maintained. Alpha floor is displayed with green text in an amber box when the autothrust is active and commands toga thrust regardless of thrust lever position, while the alpha floor conditions are met. Toga lock is displayed with green text in an amber box when the autothrust is active and toga thrust is locked while the alpha floor conditions are no longer met. The autothrust must be disconnected and rearmed to regain autothrust control. Lever climb is displayed with a flashing white text when the pilots are being requested to set the thrust levers into the climb detent. Lever MCT is displayed with a flashing white text when the pilots are being requested to set the live thrust lever to the MCT flex detent. During takeoff, this will illuminate if an engine is lost. It will also illuminate for a single engine go-around. In both cases, it occurs at green dot, but only if engine out clear was not selected on the MCDU. Lever asymmetry is displayed in amber text when one thrust lever is in the climb or MCT flex detent and the other one is not. This is for two engines only. Thrust lock is displayed in flashing amber text after autothrust disconnection, either by pilot action on the FCU or a failure, resulting in the thrust being frozen. Note, a caution light flashes and a single chime will sound every 5 seconds if the pilot takes no action in the following circumstances. 1. Thrust lock. 2. Lever climb, if the thrust levers are below the climb detent. 3. Lever MCT, if the thrust levers are below the flex MCT detent. Thanks for tuning into this bite-sized tutorial on the autothrust modes.